Deuses e deusas. Atenas, Grécia. Uma cidade viva, com comércio e cultura. Ela é também uma cidade de fé. Fé grega ortodoxa, parte do grande ramo oriental do cristianismo. Mas já existiu um outro mundo aqui, do qual restam apenas fragmentos torturantes. Os que voltam no tempo, acima e abaixo da terra, estão em busca de um mundo igualmente vivo e religioso. O mundo da Grécia Antiga. Ele ainda fala para nós através de um de seus legados, a mitologia grega. Era povoado por muitos deuses e deusas, cada um com determinados poderes no mundo, e cada um com sua própria história. Por dezenas de milhares de anos anteriores ao tempo bíblico, contos sobre deuses e seus feitos eram passados adiante por contadores de histórias.
It is extremely hard, but one tries to fantasize of what was it like in those days. I think favorite stories of gods must have been, thinking back, what did the child think and was impressed about was, how did Zeus give birth to Athena from a headache? Apollo, who was a very wild young man, who then developed into being the god of order, of music, of art. Poseidon, who would create storms when he was angry. Athena, who was the protector of our capital city and was in favor of peace.
Presidindo sobre todos estava Zeus, Deus do céu, Deus do trovão.
Zeus is a sky god, and you're in the domain of Zeus when you're out there in nature. Zeus had some control over whether you had a good day or a bad day, and a good life or a bad life. He had two jars on the doorsill, and there was a jar of good and a jar of evil. And to each man, Zeus would pour out a portion of good and a portion of evil.
Havia Afrodite e Ártemis, dois lados da mesma moeda.
Aphrodite. And what is she the goddess of? She is the goddess of sexuality, female sexuality. She's a goddess of beauty. She's associated with lots of fertility issues. You have Artemis on the other side. Artemis, who is this chaste virgin.
E Apolo, que como todos os deuses e deusas da Grécia Antiga, tinha mais de um poder.
He is the organizer, the civilizer. He's the one who brings roads to places where there were never roads before. He's the one who heals, but he also can bring plague. And this is something that happens in the case of many Greek gods. If they can cause something, they can also stop it.
He was a god, as heard it most brilliantly put, a god of distance. And therefore, he would deal with people not face to face and hand to hand. He was better at shooting his bow and killing people from a very far off distance. And therefore, his loves, perhaps, are best kept at a distance too.
Esses deuses e deusas surgiram à medida em que os gregos antigos buscavam sentido e talvez fé num mundo constantemente mutável. Suas histórias foram adornadas e modificadas através dos tempos, conforme diferentes civilizações entravam em contato com a Grécia Antiga.
Greece has been inhabited since about 70,000 BCE. And there were invasions of people from the Middle East and from the North. And each invasion led to not another set of divinities, but further layers of divinity added to the existing divinities. So Greek gods are a real amalgam of multiple cultures of the Middle East mostly.
The Greek gods were of such diversity that they are unlike many of the other gods from around the Mediterranean because they incorporated elements of a lot of different peoples around them. And they don't clearly match a lot of the other peoples, say, in Celtic or Italian religions.
Essas histórias foram sendo passadas através da tradição oral, mas por volta de 750 a.C. foram reunidas, organizadas e escritas. Apesar de pesquisadores debaterem se um ou vários autores estiveram envolvidos nessa proeza, a crença popular é de que foi apenas um: Homero.
As far as we know, the real crystallization of Greek mythology was around the time of Homer, 750 BC. And with Homer, we find the creation of Greek mythology and the creation of the gods. Homer gave the Greeks their gods. Homer was effectively the closest thing the Greeks had to a Bible.
No começo, Homero nos conta, havia oceano, espírito em forma de grande, circular e infinito rio, correndo eternamente de volta a si mesmo. Havia também uma outra presença, Tétis, às vezes chamada de a primeira mãe. Quando finalmente se encontraram, deram início a uma linhagem de descendentes, que depois produziria os deuses e deusas dos gregos antigos. Cerca de 50 anos depois de Homero, o poeta Hesíodo compôs a Teogonia, na qual descreve também a criação dos deuses. Mas, segundo Hesíodo, o mundo começou diferente. Primeiro havia uma presença sobrenatural chamada Caos, nome que significava vazio e não desordem.
Once upon a time, there was chaos. And after chaos, there was a goddess called Gaia, Earth. And Gaia slept with, married, mated Uranos, heavens.
Urano, entretanto, não queria filhos. Ele se sentia ameaçado por eles e evitava que nascessem. Gaia conspirou com Cronos, um de seus filhos por nascer, que castrou seu pai, supostamente de dentro do útero da mãe. Os genitais feridos de Urano caíram no mar, de onde emergiu uma surpreendente entidade, Afrodite, deusa do amor. Essas histórias constituem o que é conhecido como mitologia grega, derivada da palavra grega mitos. Ela implica algo falso. Mas para os gregos antigos, essas histórias eram uma questão de fé. Elas ajudavam a explicar como e por que o mundo funciona dessa forma.
Interestingly, love and war, or violence and sex, are deeply connected in Greek mythology, and not only in Greek mythology, but in a number of mythologies. Why are these two things deeply connected? I think that the ancient peoples, and certainly the Greeks, felt that deeply passionate feelings were somehow connected in the human mind and in the human emotions. That is, great desires and great fears or great hatreds were somehow linked.
Nesse sentido, as histórias e personagens da mitologia grega tinham emprego real na vida. A história da criação de Hesíodo conta como Cronos liberta seus irmãos e irmãs do ventre de Gaia. Esses seres ficariam conhecidos como titãs, nascidos só depois de seu pai ter sido castrado. O tema do conflito entre pai e filho continua, pois Cronos mataria então seus próprios filhos.
Cronos married Rhea. Every time Rhea gave birth, he'd swallow the children. Rhea desperately wanted to have some children, and so she took one baby, Zeus, when he was born, and wrapped him up and hid him in a cave in Crete to be raised, and gave Cronos a stone wrapped up in swaddling clothes that he swallowed so that he thought he was swallowing the baby. Well, Zeus grew up, came, attacked his father, and all the children emerged. And those were the beginnings of the Olympian gods.
Zeus recupera a pedra com a qual sua mãe enganou seu pai. Ela pode ser vista ainda hoje no templo sagrado de Delfos.
There's always a kind of inherent conflict and tension between fathers and sons. Greece has been, really until this century, a subsistence economy. And so if you have a small farm, the father is in charge of that. The son, even the first son, is not going to get any kind of rights until the father moves on, retires or dies.
What is the concern there? There's a real concern, obviously, about issues of succession and power.
Depois de Zeus resgatar seus irmãos e irmãs de seu pai, ele se apoderou do Monte Olimpo. Dessa fortaleza, eles lutaram para controlar o mundo contra seu pai, suas tias e tios, todos eles titãs. Finalmente, os deuses e deusas do Olimpo prevaleceram. Aceitaram Zeus, que era também Deus do céu, como seu rei. Mas os seres humanos ainda teriam que aparecer em cena. A seguir, a perturbadora e provocante chegada da humanidade no mundo. A história da criação na mitologia grega continua no relato de Hesíodo. Gerações de deuses permanecem lutando entre si antes da chegada da humanidade no cosmos.
I think it says something very interesting about a culture, whether it considers its formative moments to be ones of conflict or ones of sort of unified production, peaceful production. I am overwhelmed each time I study or teach a course that deals with Greek mythology, how persistent these conflicts are.
Depois de triunfar sobre os titãs, o grande deus Zeus se casa com Metis, ela mesma uma titã e, portanto, sua tia. Posteriormente, eles têm uma filha, que irrompe adulta e armada de sua testa. Ela é Atena, deusa dos guerreiros. Outros deuses e deusas chegam ao mundo, cada um com diferentes funções. Todos eles, entretanto, têm uma coisa em comum, um atributo que os separa virtualmente de todas as outras divindades do mundo antigo. Suas imagens são humanas.
If you think of Egyptian religion, with its gods having animal heads, various animal bodies, or Near Eastern, Akkadian, Mesopotamian, Hittite religion, where you see divinities associated with lions and other fierce animals, the Greeks' decision to somehow represent the gods as being like Greeks is really an innovation. And we're not really sure where it came from.
When you think about divinity, you're talking about the unknown. And you really can only talk about the unknown in terms of the known. In the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis, it says, God came down and he walked in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the evening. It's almost impossible to talk about divinities without doing something like that. Xenophanes said if horses could draw, horses would draw their gods as horses.
Nos relatos de Homero, é só depois que os deuses e deusas vão morar no Monte Olimpo que a história dos homens começa a se revelar. Os relatos judaico-cristãos sobre o começo do mundo culminam com a criação do homem por Deus, e o homem recebe o domínio sobre todas as outras criaturas na Terra. Entretanto, os gregos antigos acreditavam que o nascimento do homem era de pouca importância para o cosmos.
Although the Greeks had a human-centered universe, their view of man was almost as an afterthought. He was a smaller creature in the universe, something certainly lesser than the gods. And therefore the creation of humans had to take a second or third place down the line in the Greek world of the cosmos and the Olympian deities. So why was the creation of man given such a small role in the creation of the universe?
It could be that Greeks just assumed that human beings were always around, that human beings are in fact so important that there was never a stage when they didn't exist. It's still something of a mystery.
I like to think that Greek myths reflects a certain understanding by the Greeks of humans' place in the world, that humans are not the center of things, that there's a whole wealth of created world into which humans have to fit. This is a great contrast with a number of other cultures and belief systems.
Assim como o surgimento dos deuses, a mitologia grega contém diferentes versões sobre a criação do homem. Em nenhuma delas, a humanidade tem um começo auspicioso.
We lived like ants in the ground, and we couldn't read, and we didn't know the seasons, and we didn't know the weather, and we couldn't think, and we couldn't hear. We were just despicable worms, and worth despising.
Na versão de Homero da criação dos humanos, o Deus Prometeu forma o primeiro homem do barro e assopra a vida nele. Em Hesíodo, Zeus criou progressivas raças de homens: ouro, prata, bronze e ferro. Parece que cada raça simboliza diferentes aspectos da condição humana. A primeira raça de homens era feita de ouro, suas vidas eram tranquilas, suas colheitas abundantes. Eles literalmente festejavam com os deuses.
In the beginning, there was a golden age, and people lived on the earth, and all the crops grew of their own accord, and everybody was good, and everybody was just. And those people, after a while, just disappeared.
A raça de ouro parece ter vivido uma existência perfeita, semelhante ao paraíso. Ainda assim, essa raça desapareceu sem explicação. No relato bíblico do paraíso, as privações da vida são vistas como resultado de Adão e Eva terem caído em tentação no jardim do Éden. Para a raça de ouro dos homens na mitologia grega, não existe uma explicação assim para seu desaparecimento. O motivo de seu destino permanece um mistério.
The Greek system, in which humans and their creation are not really a topic of concern, is so different from what you find in Genesis, where we have this focus on the creation of the first man. Of course, in Genesis, it's related to the further story, what happened after the first man and woman disobeyed God. In Greek myth, disobeying the gods is not such a big deal as it is in Genesis.
So why doesn't Hesiod have an answer, or why doesn't Hesiod give an answer to why the Golden Race came to an end with the Judeo-Christian myth of the fall from the Garden of Eden? Because that clearly was the fault of Adam and Eve. And what that means is there is no really good explanation for why the world is so difficult now. Why humans can't have an easy time.
Depois da extinção da raça de ouro, Zeus forja homens de prata. Mas essa raça não era muito evoluída.
The Silver Age people were babies forever, and then they had this short period of maturity, and then they had a horrible old age. And they disappeared under the earth. They were more arrogant and did not worship the gods sufficiently.
Em seguida surgem os homens de bronze, que se exterminam através de guerras constantes. Posteriormente aparece a raça de homem que vive até hoje. São tidos como homens de ferro.
So basically, this story of degeneration has moved to the present age where actually it shows a balance in these various views of the important things in life for the Greeks, namely your attitudes to the gods and your attitudes towards warfare and fighting for your city-state and how you can get along or not get along with each other.
Curiosamente, todas essas histórias consideram apenas a criação de metade da raça humana, o homem. A mulher foi criada como uma aflição, uma punição, e tudo por causa de uma trapaça.
The first woman was sent to the earth as a punishment to mankind. Now, this sounds incredibly misogynistic, and it was an incredibly misogynistic story on the part of Hesiod, who told this in 700 BC. But the story goes that one of the gods, Prometheus, tried to trick the master and king of all the cosmos, Zeus.
Prometheus is a trickster god. He's a smart god. Prometheus means forethought. He killed a sheep, and he took the sheep, and he took all the good, wonderful meat, and he put it inside the disgusting belly. And he took all the bare bones, and he wrapped them up in the beautiful white shining fat, which is, of course, what burns in a sacrifice. And he presented these two bundles to Zeus, and he said, "You pick."
Zeus sabia que estava sendo enganado por Prometeu, que representa a raça humana. Como vingança, Zeus pune o homem retirando o fogo dele. Prometeu responde roubando o fogo de volta e devolvendo-o para a humanidade.
And by stealing and giving men this gift of fire, he was therefore punished indirectly by having a woman created who was given to human beings. Now, Zeus didn't just sort of give this evil thing, as he thought, to mankind. He called it a beautiful evil.
She's one you can't do without. She's a kalon kakon in the terms of the Greek, a beautiful bad thing. And so Greek myth, Greek poetry likes to have it both ways. Women are beautiful. Women are something irresistible. At the same time, women make you work. And so they're a bad thing.
I do think that throughout Greek mythology, you see a repeated emphasis on the threat that women pose. The threat they pose because of your need for them, the need to have children, and the very real fear of losing control because of desire. Overwhelming feminine sexuality threatens men.
Zeus não dá qualquer mulher para os homens. Na verdade, dá a eles uma kalon kikon, belo demônio. Seu nome é Pandora, e ela chega com um pote cheio de coisas ruins para lançar sobre a humanidade. A seguir, por que a esperança estava no pote de Pandora? A primeira mulher da mitologia grega é Pandora, e sua história soa como a de Eva e o fruto proibido no jardim do paraíso. Tendo recebido um pote e ordens para não abri-lo, Pandora o abre mesmo assim, e todos os infortúnios do mundo escapam dele: a doença, a dor, o sofrimento, a desordem. Tarde demais, ela fecha o pote, deixando nele apenas uma coisa: a esperança. Mas o que a esperança fazia no pote de infortúnios de Pandora?
Hope is there as an evil, which is, I think, fascinating. Hope is an evil because hope allows you to act with the sense that you can control the future. And in Hesiod, that is a very dangerous thing to do. You can't control the future, and it's to act under a delusion.
Is hope something good or something bad? And the Greeks loved this kind of dilemma because hope could be good, could be bad, and so it was ambiguously left back in the jar for humans to use or to avoid.
Pandora é o exemplo mais proeminente, mas certamente não o único, da mulher como fonte do infortúnio na mitologia grega. Alguns pesquisadores encontram um significado mais profundo para o menosprezo da mulher e apontam para Afrodite, a deusa do amor.
If you look at the myths of Aphrodite, who is the most beautiful and the most sexually desirable thing ever, men are afraid of her. She sees a man, a human being, Anchises, on a hill outside of Troy, and she wants to sleep with him. And she goes to him, and he says, "You are too beautiful to be a human. You must be a goddess, and I don't want to sleep with you." And she says, "Oh, no, I'm just a maiden from the neighborhood." They go to bed together, and when he wakes up, she's become her goddess self. And he's terrified. He's terrified he's going to be emasculated, that he'll lose his strength.
Em contraste, os gregos antigos acreditavam que Atena, uma deusa sem função sexual, era detentora de grande força.
Athena is the protector. Athena is the warrior divinity who leads the just defense war. She is the city goddess and in many respects the most important divinity the Athenians have. And that might be true for many other cities where you have an Acropolis with the Temple of Athena on top.
Dessa forma, o mundo dos deuses e deusas gregos não é apenas uma mera coleção de histórias, mas uma janela para uma antiga civilização, para seus pensamentos e seus valores.
The kind of non-linear thinking that you see in myths, the sort of narratives that leap all around, that introduce strange creatures, look a lot like dreams. And so the question, I think, is whether Greek myths are somehow the collective unconsciousness of Greek civilization at an early period.
Conscientemente ou não, os deuses eram muito presentes na vida cotidiana dos gregos antigos.
In each of the mountains, in each of the plants, in each of the emotions they felt that there was a God in control behind this.
One of the attractive and unusual things about Greek religion from the beginning is its responsiveness to environment. There are nymphs, for example, who inhabit watery places. There are nymphs of the mountains, nymphs of the trees. There's an acknowledgement that rivers are a kind of religious force. And Greek religion in this way has a certain affiliation with modern ecology, the recognition that individual places have a value, a kind of numinous quality, a sacred quality.
The Greeks had particular terms for sacred. In fact, they had several terms for sacred. One of them is hieros. And hieros means that it belongs to the gods. In fact, the Greek word for religion is ta hierai, the sacred things.
Assim, as histórias na mitologia grega são usadas para explicar um mundo sempre difícil e aleatório. O inverno nasceu quando Perséfone, filha da deusa Deméter, é raptada pelo deus Hades e levada para o mundo subterrâneo para ser sua noiva.
Demeter was horrendously upset to have lost her daughter and began searching the world looking for her daughter. Couldn't find her daughter, wept, cried, crops didn't grow, hence the gods weren't getting sacrificed. So finally, some gods went to Zeus and said, you've got to get Persephone back so her mother makes the crops grow so we get our sacrifices and all the people don't die.
No final, Perséfone tem permissão para voltar para sua mãe com uma condição. Todo ano, Perséfone deve passar 3 meses. Todo ano, Perséfone deve passar 3 meses com Hades. É durante esse tempo que sua mãe, Deméter, deusa da agricultura, fica inconsolável. Dessa forma, todo ano, os campos ficam estéreis sob o frio do inverno. Assim, as grandes privações da vida eram explicadas. As dificuldades pessoais, entretanto, eram explicadas através de alguma ofensa aos deuses. Os que ofendiam os deuses eram punidos, não por alguma autoridade terrestre, mas pelos próprios deuses.
There's a Greek word, in fact, deidaimonia, which means fear of the gods or respect for the gods. And this was a positive thing. Life was felt to be fairly precarious, and you needed to do everything you could to get whatever powers ruled the world on your side to keep safe. Many of them lived one drought away from starvation, and you just didn't mess around with the world like that.
One of the things I love about Greek myth is it never lets people off the hook. It never says, this happened because the gods made it happen. It's our fault if we can just understand why. It's sort of I think, a difficult world to exist in.
Num mundo difícil, as pessoas sempre buscam um herói. Alguém que traga libertação de uma vida aparentemente cheia de adversidades. Alguns acreditam que a criança nascida de um deus grego e uma mãe humana prognosticou o surgimento de Cristo. Estaria isso destinado a acontecer? A seguir, duas das maiores figuras na mitologia grega e como elucidam a ideia de destino versus livre-arbítrio na Grécia Antiga.
É fantástico. Vamos.
Uma das figuras mais famosas na mitologia grega pode ter ajudado a construir um caminho para um evento posterior crucial na história humana. Herades, mais conhecido como Hércules, nasceu porque o grande deus Zeus cobiçou uma bela mortal. Mas ela era uma esposa fiel. Zeus tomou a aparência de seu marido e teve relações com ela. O abuso é complementado pelo fato do próprio Zeus ser casado com uma de suas irmãs, Hera.
The notion that the gods are not always ethical, not always honest, is also one that makes sense when you think about it. And the Greeks seem to have been comfortable with it for many centuries. It makes sense because if the gods are humans, but better off somehow, more strong, more powerful, immortal, they never have to take the consequences of anything they do, whereas humans do. The burden of acting ethically, of thinking about consequences, falls on human beings, not on gods.
Hera não podia desabafar sua raiva sobre Zeus. Num ato totalmente característico de um deus grego, ela volta sua ira contra a criança nascida da infidelidade de seu marido. Hércules é talvez o mais famoso herói grego, uma figura particularmente importante na mitologia grega. Mesmo na infância, Hércules era dotado de extraordinária força. Hera envia serpentes mortais para seu berço e Hércules estrangula as duas.
Many of the Greek heroes did in fact have one divine parent and one mortal parent. More generally, a hero was a man of more than normal strength, who was somehow marked out for a life of achievement, but also a life of enormous difficulty. They were very difficult to integrate into society precisely because of their great capacities.
A vingativa Hera continua a perseguir o filho ilegítimo de seu marido durante toda a sua vida, levando-o de tempos em tempos a acessos de raiva e loucura. Lamentando profundamente os assassinatos e outros crimes cometidos durante esses acessos, Hércules se encarrega de grandes tarefas, geralmente da morte de tiranos e monstros. No fim de sua vida, Hércules ganha a imortalidade e é levado por seu pai, Zeus, para viver com ele no Monte Olimpo. Assim sendo, a história de Hércules pode ter aberto caminho para o apóstolo Paulo, que levaria a palavra de uma nova fé para os gregos séculos depois.
They had a story of a son of God, Heracles, who suffered and died and then went through an apotheosis, himself went up to Olympus. And so the story of another son of God who suffered and died and went to heaven would not be all that unfamiliar. In the same way, the notion that a God could take on human form and look exactly like one of us was completely acceptable to a pagan Greek audience. And so early Christianity proceeded in Greece and struck roots in Greece quite easily.
Not quite a Christ figure, but elements of that, because it was someone who through toil and suffering and labor and loyalty achieved divinity.
Mesmo Hércules sendo o único, ele é apenas um dos muitos heróis que andaram entre os gregos. Há também Aquiles e Ulisses, grandes guerreiros da Guerra de Troia. E Teseu, cujos feitos incluem ter matado o aterrador Minotauro, a criatura que banqueteava com a carne de jovens gregos. Mas os heróis não precisavam descender dos deuses, e nem eram necessariamente heróicos nos padrões atuais. Para os gregos antigos, um herói era alguém que rompia os elos com a vida comum a despeito das consequências.
It's not necessary that a hero be descended from a god or a goddess. It's not necessary that a hero even do something good in life. And so achievement is more doing something extraordinary and being recognized for it. Now, the extraordinary thing that a hero could do could even be killing a number of the enemy or killing people in his own community in such a strange fashion that the gods have to be consulted. So the heroes are dangerous, unusual individuals, extraordinary but not necessarily extraordinarily good.
Heroes really are a projection of what it is to be human on a large scale. They really focus both the great potential of human beings at their best and also the vulnerabilities of humans.
Outro herói improvável foi Édipo, que matou seu pai e desposou a mãe. Tendo cumprido seu destino terrível, Édipo arranca seus olhos e busca a redenção. É uma história para adultos que fala sobre o lado negro dos sentimentos entre pais e filhos.
I think there definitely was a thread of Greek culture and of Greek mythology which was interested in the conflict between father and son. Obviously, Sigmund Freud saw this and picked up on it in the story of the Oedipus and the Oedipus complex. And I think there was a thread of generational conflict that the Greeks actually feared but recognized as real at the same time.
A história de Édipo e de seus pais levanta outra questão imemorial. As vidas dos seres humanos são pré-determinadas? Ou os humanos têm poder de exercer o livre-arbítrio?
Oedipus is someone who, for no reason ever given, has this fate that he will kill his father and marry his mother. When Oedipus has realized that he is not the son of the king of Corinth, as he thought he was, he says, I count myself the child of chance. And by chance, he means something very random. There is no plan. By the end of the play, it's turned out that everything he has ever done has fit into a plan. And that if he is the child of chance, it's chance in the sense that closely allied to fate.
He, Oedipus, the man, made choices. When he learned he was going to kill his father and marry his mother, he fled his home, not knowing he was adopted. And of course meets his father on the road and kills him and arrives in the city and marries his mother. He chose to leave his home. He did a terrible thing, but he didn't do it trying to do evil. And fate didn't make him do it.
A questão do destino pessoal versus o papel do livre-arbítrio era de tamanha importância para os gregos antigos que eles personificaram o destino na forma de 3 deusas.
When you read the poetry of Homer, it seems that it goes 2 ways. On the one hand, the Fates are a group of 3 women, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. Their names mean the weaver, the allotter, and not turning back. And they weave a thread for each person's life when that person is born and determine when that person's life is going to end. On the other hand, we see in Homer's poetry that fate is a power above the gods. The gods bow to fate in several instances.
You can look at the story of Oedipus and talk about fate. Was he fated to kill his father and marry his mother? Yes. What does that mean? Does that mean he didn't have any free will? No. It doesn't mean that. It means that's what was going to happen.
The Greeks had a complicated view of how the world worked. On the one hand, the gods controlled a lot of actions of human beings or had an effect upon it. But yet, the humans also could control their own individual destinies and call a lot of the shots. So there's this funny relationship between what the gods control and what humans control. And you know what? They loved this ambiguity.
Assim sendo, os gregos antigos chegaram ao acordo de que não havia garantias na vida. Algumas de suas preocupações parecem assustadoramente familiares hoje em dia.
This consciousness that the Greeks have, that you cannot have too many generations on the earth at the same time, is even expressed in a myth, the myth of the beginning of the Trojan War, which says that the earth was burdened with too many people and cried out to Zeus to relieve her burden. And so Zeus invented the Trojan War to get rid of a lot of people.
A seguir, em Deuses e Deusas, as falhas e defeitos das divindades gregas e por que deuses imperfeitos faziam pleno sentido na Grécia Antiga. As histórias de deuses e deusas da Grécia Antiga são eternas. Elas ainda têm significado para nós hoje. Entre as divindades, havia 2 grupos de adoráveis irmãs que habitavam o Monte Olimpo: as Graças e as Musas. As Graças conferiam beleza, charme e gratidão ao mundo dos mortais. As musas tinham um profundo impacto em como as gerações transmitiam os contos de deuses e deusas, e as sagas de toda uma era através da tradição oral. De seu elevado patamar, elas desciam até a Terra para ensinar história, astronomia e artes.
Each one of the 9 muses is associated with a particular subject, usually concerning the arts and sciences. For instance, Clio, the proclaimer, is the one that is associated with epic poetry and is the muse of history. Now, the Muses are very well known because we have words like museum, the seat of the Muses, that are in contemporary English, and of course Greek.
Greek stories are about those things that people regard as important. They wouldn't have persisted if they weren't. I mean, if stories are going to last and be retold for several thousand years, there must be something in them that has meaning for the people who hear them across generations.
Havia sinais do divino em toda parte. Para os gregos, os deuses eram tão reais quanto os campos que aravam e as famílias que constituíam.
The number of little shrines.
Os deuses eram tão reais quanto os campos que aravam e as famílias que constituíam.
The number of little shrines that would be all around the city, the number of dedications to gods in big sanctuaries, really does speak to a pretty strong belief in them. Life was felt to be fairly precarious, and you needed to do everything you could to get whatever powers ruled the world on your side, to keep safe.
Do nascimento até a morte, e de estação a estação, cada fase da vida humana se entrelaçava com os deuses. Onipresentes como eram para os gregos antigos, os mesmos deuses nem sempre eram bem conceituados na Terra. Há 3.000 anos, a Grécia era uma colcha de retalhos de cidades-estado independentes, unidas por uma língua, cultura e comércio em comum. Mas enquanto divindades como Zeus, Prometeu e Deméter eram respeitados nas mais de 700 cidades-estado, cada cidade e vila tinha seu próprio deus.
The landscape of Greece is just full of gods. Gods who might not even be heard of in the next village. Every little stream, every spring of fresh water, something you come to appreciate in the dusty Greek climate, has its own divinity.
The hills divided up village from village and people from people. So each village was encouraged to have its own favorite gods and its own favorite heroes. And I think that, in terms of the natural layout of the land, was very important in the formation of myth and of their religion.
Os deuses eram muitos, assim como suas funções. Hermes era o protetor dos rebanhos e criações de animais domesticados. Hera era a deusa do casamento e da maternidade. Eros prevalecia sobre as questões do amor. Hefesto era o deus do fogo e da metalurgia. Poseidon reinava sobre o mar. Havia Pan, parte humano, parte bode. Era reconhecido como o deus dos pastores. E havia Ártemis, protetora da natureza e dos jovens.
Artemis is associated with young, blooming nature, with young animals. But Artemis is also associated with the initiation of young women. So there's a continuum in Greek thinking between what happens in the natural world and what happens in what we would identify as a very different human social sphere. To Greek mythological thinking, these are all part of the same phenomenon. And that's why Artemis can be the huntress, the one who's associated with the wild, but also the one who tames young girls.
De todas as divindades que influenciavam a vida humana, Deméter era uma das mais importantes. Celebrada uma vez a cada 5 anos, era a deusa dos cereais e das colheitas.
Greeks looked at and lived with their landscape for an awfully long time and developed stories by watching nature and by living with it. And the worship of a kind of earth goddess who protected the earth and saw to the welfare of the crops and withheld the crops if people didn't behave themselves. All of that was part of the Greek view of the cycle of nature.
A relação entre homem e divindade não era simples. Mas apesar de não ser uma aliança fácil, apesar dos deuses serem poderosos e imortais, eles não estavam livres do questionamento humano. Os gregos antigos criticavam com frequência o comportamento imoral dos deuses.
They could act in excess. Each one had passions, had made mistakes, but the immortals had to respect their own boundaries. This is the main difference between gods and mortals. Gods could do anything they liked, do as they please. Mortals had to refrain from excess. Greek gods and goddesses are facets of what could become of a deadly passion. What could happen to mortals if they really step over a boundary.
Now, we might think of criticizing the gods as a kind of blasphemy, but in fact, it reinforces the notion that the gods do exist. And I think what was really being criticized were other Greeks' attitudes about the gods. Something that's very hard for us to understand is that the Greeks could play with their notions of gods.
Superiores aos humanos, sobre os quais tinham influência, os deuses eram, entretanto, sujeitos às mesmas paixões, falhas e fraquezas dos mortais. Eles conheciam o amor, o desespero e a tragédia. Tinham a forma humana e eram vulneráveis a ferimentos e doenças. Mas, diferente das pessoas, eles saravam rapidamente.
Of course, they weren't just humans, they were different from humans in many ways. They, first of all, obviously never died. Secondly, they had incredible powers of strength and knowledge. But the reason why they're in human form is that the Greeks had tremendous pride in the human form. The Greeks had such high value for the perfection of human intelligence and physicality that they could not imagine a more perfect form to attribute to the gods.
This notion that the gods are humans plus seems to have answered a very deep need in the Greeks. It's a sort of fantasy of overcoming all the weaknesses that make us humans what we are.
Os deuses também estavam sujeitos a leis semelhantes às que regiam a humanidade. Hermes era o guardião dos viajantes. Quando desimpediu um caminho matando um monstro de 100 olhos chamado Argus, teve que ser julgado pelo seu feito.
Well, he's a god, but he's polluted. And so he had to stand trial. And the way the gods all cast their votes was by putting a stone at his foot, which made a stone heap, which is called a herm.
Apesar dos deuses não serem perfeitos, não eram poderes com os quais se podia brincar.
What you did need to do was be careful not to offend the gods. Not to set yourself up as the gods' equal, not to be arrogant in that way, because that was inviting disaster, not from any other humans, but from the gods themselves. There's the story of Salmoneus, who had himself driven around on a cart, banging on shields, or some noise-making implement, saying that he was Zeus and trying to imitate Zeus's thunder, and he was probably dispatched like a thunderbolt.
I think everybody believed that somebody really powerful had to be in charge of lightning, and the obvious candidate was Zeus. Zeus was a weather god, primarily. In fact, when it rained, you said, Zeus is raining. You didn't say, it's raining. And so lightning, just this powerful, strange thing that can kill you, obviously had to be under the control of someone like Zeus.
Em Atenas, o povo também venerava um deus sem nome, ao qual se referiam simplesmente como Deus desconhecido.
The shrine to the unknown god was probably the Athenians' way, in their own religious system, of covering their bets. Just in case there was a god out there that they hadn't managed to worship, a god that might do something to them, they had a shrine to the unknown god.
Os gregos racionalizavam o mundo ao seu redor. A filosofia e o pensamento intelectual floresceram, principalmente em Atenas. Era aqui que Atena presidia em nobre esplendor sobre o povo. Deusa da guerra e patrona das artes, ela era louvada na forma de uma estátua dourada de marfim e ébano no Párteno. Acreditavam que sua presença simbólica tornaria a cidade invencível a ataques. Milhares vinham prestar tributo a ela aqui, numa das construções mais belas já erigidas. Mas de todos os lugares sagrados na Grécia Antiga, poucos se aproximaram do significado de um vale arborizado de insuperável beleza e estranho poder. Pois era a ele que os gregos vinham para saber sobre o futuro. A seguir, o assombroso mistério do oráculo de Delfos. Esse é o Olimpo. Há 2.500 anos, uma estátua de 13 metros de altura ficava aqui. Ela era feita de ouro e marfim e era considerada uma das 7 maravilhas do mundo antigo. Dedicada a Zeus em louvor à sua onipotência, essa antiga maravilha presidia sobre o mais antigo evento esportivo organizado na Terra, os Jogos Olímpicos.
Every 4 years, the Greeks from all over the Greek world and the islands and Italy would come to Olympia to celebrate this festival.
Restrito unicamente aos homens, inclusive os espectadores, atletas nus competiam por uma coroa e pela glória sob um sol escaldante em 5 modalidades: salto em distância, arremesso de disco, arremesso de dardo, luta livre e corrida dos 100 metros. Apesar do objetivo dos Jogos ser a vitória, a intenção era prestar culto.
According to one scholar, David Sansone, he believed that the athletic event is an expenditure of ritual energy for the gods. And in fact, one way of showing this is that what the athletes did was sweat. And they sweat and they had dirt on them and they had olive oil on them. And after they finished competing, they cleaned off the scum from their skin using a strigil. And they actually collected the scum from the athletes, which was thought to have magical properties. And in a sense, they were reaping the product of human energy and having this as a magical potion that the gods would honor.
Assim eram as Olimpíadas. E desde então, em todo o mundo, vencer um evento olímpico é um feito sem comparações.
When I had the luck to win the Olympic Games and come first, my country hadn't had a first place in any Olympics for over 50 years. All this was very exciting for a young person. You know, the idea that you get onto the podium, your achievement is honored only by a medal and nothing else. You hear the national anthem of your country, you see the Greek flag going up. These things remain in your mind, and I've often said that is the greatest feeling in my life, other than getting engaged to my wife.
Outro lugar central para os gregos antigos era Delfos. Místico e misterioso, Delfos talvez seja mais conhecido como o lugar onde residia um famoso oráculo. Conhecido também como o oráculo de Apolo, ele dava pistas para os que buscavam conhecer o futuro.
The oracle of Apollo was a priestess who was named the Pythia. People would come from all over the known world to seek the advice of this priestess for important questions, often affairs of state, political questions, and direction.
Infelizmente, o oráculo falava em uma língua que ninguém entendia. Suas afirmações sobre o futuro tinham que ser traduzidas por um profeta, mas mesmo assim suas profecias eram sempre obscuras.
There's one famous ambiguous answer in which a great king asks the oracle, "Should I go to war?" And the oracle says, "If you go to war, you will destroy a great kingdom." And so the guy goes to war, and of course his kingdom is the great one destroyed, and he should have read that the right way. The oracle always gives you a kind of question in return, a puzzle, an enigma that you have to answer.
Humans are born, and they grow up, and they make a choice to do this and to do that. At any point in their life, they could go to Delphi and hear an oracle like, "Beware of the sea because it will kill you." And you spend your whole life avoiding the sea so that you won't get killed. Then one day, you're in an aquarium, and a tank bursts, and you drowned in this seawater, in this saltwater aquarium, or something more sensible than that. Did fate point in their life they could go to Delphi and hear an oracle like, "Beware of the sea because it will kill you." And you spend your whole life avoiding the sea so that you won't get killed. Then one day, you're in an aquarium, and a tank bursts, and you drowned in this seawater, in this saltwater aquarium, or something more sensible than that. Did fate make that happen? No. It's just the God knew the future and could say that it was going to happen.
Delfos era também o lugar onde reinava um filho de Zeus. Seu nome era Apolo. Além de reinar sobre Delfos, Apolo tinha outras responsabilidades. Era o deus associado à sexualidade e ao amor. Ironicamente, o próprio Apolo nunca foi conhecido como um grande amante.
Apollo is beautiful. He's the most beautiful male, as Aphrodite is the most beautiful female. He is the best athlete. He is a beautiful singer. He is strong and a marvelous archer. He's your perfect human being, your perfect male. And he has this sad, sad life. He falls in love over and over and over, and none of the women want him.
And he attempted to rape girls at certain occasions in his life. He's really a god, I think, of distance and rationality more than a god of love.
Talvez a mais trágica das escapadelas românticas de Apolo tenha sido seu amor por Cassandra, filha do rei de Troia. Como a mitologia grega iria ver, o trágico caso de Apolo e Cassandra teria um impacto direto no curso da história.
He falls in love with Cassandra, who's a princess in Troy. And he says, you know, I'll give you the gift of prophecy if you will sleep with me. And she says, okay, and he does, and then she rejects him, and he makes it so that no one will ever believe any of her prophecies.
E assim, segundo Homero, uma briga aparentemente sem importância de amantes teria depois um papel fundamental numa das batalhas clássicas do mundo antigo, a Guerra de Troia.
The Greek stories of Homer told of a glorious day in which all the Greeks actually did one thing together. They did an expedition, and they fought the Trojans.
Segundo Homero, o conflito começou quando Paris, filho do rei de Troia, raptou a bela filha de um rei grego. Furioso com o rapto, o rei e seu irmão reúnem todos os líderes do mundo grego para empreender um ataque à Troia. Durante 10 longos anos, eles mantêm um cerco à cidade, mas sem resultados. Troia era uma fortaleza, mas não era impenetrável. Então, um general grego chamado Odisseu veio com um plano que ecoaria através da história. Ele sugeriu que os gregos construíssem um enorme cavalo de madeira e fingissem deixar Troia como se o cavalo fosse um tributo de sua partida. Mas Helena, a princesa grega que havia então se apaixonado por seu raptor, conhecia bem o seu povo e suspeitou de uma armadilha.
Helen, who went and imitated the voices of many wives of the companions of the Greeks and walked around the Trojan horse, hoping that some of them might hear the voices of their wives and really cry out. Odysseus was the one that restrained his companions from revealing themselves.
Assim, a tragédia aguardava os troianos insuspeitos. O cavalo é levado para dentro dos muros da cidade. Mas eles têm ainda mais uma chance quando Cassandra, a troiana que rejeitou as investidas do deus Apolo, tentou avisar seus companheiros cidadãos.
Another warning came from Cassandra, the Trojan princess. She had been given the gift of prophecy by Apollo in exchange for sleeping with him. But in the end she refused, so Apollo made sure that nobody would believe in her prophecies.
Dessa forma, o deus Apolo se vingou de Cassandra, a mortal que o havia desprezado. Foi a desgraça dos cidadãos de Troia. Depois de muito festejarem e celebrarem, os troianos pegaram no sono. Tarde da noite, encobertos pela escuridão, os exércitos gregos voltaram. Dentro da cidade murada de Troia, Odisseu e seus homens saíram furtivamente da barriga do cavalo de madeira e abriram os portões da cidade. Os gregos irromperam pelos portões abertos e devastaram a cidade. Mas a vingança não faz amantes melhores. Apolo continuaria sendo um fracasso nos assuntos do coração. Contrastando totalmente com Apolo na área dos romances, havia outro deus que presidia sobre Delfos: Dionísio.
Dionysus, on the other hand, is a guy you'd expect to have a lot of luck with the ladies. He's a god who is a god of the vines, he's a god of wine, he's a god of vegetation, he's a god of the sea. So he's a god who's been described as a god of the fluid element, a god of fluidity. And I think that's an excellent description because he's a god who can induce madness on the individual. Your mind can turn to a fluid mush if you're under the influence of Dionysus, whether it's through drink or through some religious ecstasy.
Strong emotion is Dionysus. Formal expression is Apollo. Of course, that idea, which is as well known as the division between classical and romantic, is no longer valid. Yet, the idea of relating Apollo and Dionysus was one that was quite pertinent in antiquity. During the 3 winter months at Delphi that Apollo was absent, Dionysus replaced him. Dionysus is the god of civic disorder, but also the god of imperial democracy, whereas Apollo is the god of civic order.
Assim sendo, como era geralmente o caso dos deuses da Grécia Antiga, a história tem uma moral. Nesse caso, a lição reside no próprio contraste entre Apolo e Dionísio.
Dionysus is a god who is worshipped by women and is worshipped in the countryside and leads women out of their homes, away from their looms, to the tops of mountains where they dance all night and carry torches, and men drank a lot. We think about Apollo as the god of reason, as the god of order. On his temple at Delphi, there are all these things. It says, nothing too much, Medanagon, nothing too much, moderation in all things.
Enquanto os deuses amavam, batalhavam e imperavam sobre a terra e os céus, debaixo das planícies férteis e das paisagens ensolaradas da Grécia Antiga, havia um outro domínio, um lugar escuro e de mau augúrio. A seguir, o aterrador destino das almas mortas na Grécia Antiga, o mundo subterrâneo. Quando os gregos da antiguidade morriam, ou eram enterrados ou cremados. Depois da morte, havia o mundo subterrâneo, uma espécie de existência sombria, onde não havia vida após a morte consciente. Ninguém ia para o céu. Ele era de domínio exclusivo dos deuses.
After death, we have a soul, according to the Greeks, which is called psyche, which goes fluttering off like a shadow of smoke into the underworld. Now, when you get to the underworld, this place is called Hades, or it's sometimes called the House of Hades, because Hades is the god of the underworld. And there's a journey that the soul has to take.
A jornada era através do lendário rio Estige, ou Rio do Ódio, com um homem chamado Caronte, que conduzia a alma num barco.
You have to pay Charon your obols or 2 obols to get across the river, and that's why these coins were put in the mouths of the corpse upon death. When you got there, the first thing you meet is Cerberus, this 3-headed guard dog at the door to the underworld. You went by, because you were a dead man, you were allowed in. If you tried to get in as a live man, you were eaten alive by this thing.
No relato de Homero, o Hades é um lugar austero e aterrador. É tão deserto que não existe nenhum templo para Hades. O mundo subterrâneo é descrito como um lugar onde o espírito humano sofre uma eternidade de sonhos vazios.
Hades is terrible and inexorable, but he is not the punisher of souls like Satan in Christianity. Psyche in Greek means breath, comes from a verb psychein, which is to breathe. Now, when someone dies, he no longer breathes. Psyche has really been translated as soul. Now, psyches in the underworld have no consciousness.
Havia 2 níveis para o mundo subterrâneo. O primeiro, chamado Érebo, era para onde a alma humana ia logo após a morte. O segundo era um lugar mais profundo e mais terrível, chamado Tártaro. As almas impenitentes e violentas que haviam ofendido aos deuses eram banidas para o temido Tártaro.
One of the most famous characters who was put into Tartarus was a fellow named Tantalus. And Tantalus was made to stand in a river with a fruit tree over his head. And he was eternally thirsty and eternally hungry, because whenever he reached to drink out of the river, the water would flow through his hands and he couldn't get it to his mouth. And when he reached for the fruit of the tree over his head, it would always move just out of reach. And so he was eternally tantalized, as we have the word from it now.
E assim os deuses e suas histórias deram sentido aos diferentes ciclos da vida, e até à possibilidade de uma vida após a morte. Ajudaram também os gregos a estabelecer uma moral e um corpo ético. Na Grécia Antiga, uma das civilizações mais avançadas da época, essas histórias inspiraram depois o nascimento de uma nova forma de arte: o teatro. Escritores de peças como Eurípides, Sófocles e Aristófanes as dramatizavam, permitindo que contos épicos ganhassem vida para as pessoas através dos séculos.
The relation of literature to myth and religious belief among the Greeks is a very complicated one. You have to remember that for them, literature, poetry especially, was not the preserve of an educated elite. It was not even originally meant to be read. It was publicly performed. It was accessible to everyone.
They had various kinds of performances. They had oral poetry, choral dancing, drama, but they would never think of it as something like one category, and especially they would never think of reading this material. You had it performed. And therefore it's much more deeply embedded in the local culture. It's not something that only a few people do, read these works. It's something that everybody hears and sees.
Alguns dos primeiros autores escreveram suas peças e poemas em torno de temas críticos sobre os deuses, algo que os filósofos condenavam veementemente.
Plato's criticism of traditional literature and of the stories in them.
Alguns dos primeiros autores escreveram suas peças e poemas em torno de temas críticos sobre os deuses, algo que os filósofos condenavam veementemente.
Plato's criticism of traditional literature and of the stories in them was that the gods essentially didn't act like gods. I think Plato especially was very uncomfortable with that because of his own notion of what a god ought to be. You can see some of the same critique in Euripides, in his tragedies, his sense that, gods shouldn't really act the way that a lot of the myths he's treating dramatically show them.
Certainly when you look at a drama like the Ion, in which Apollo is represented as a rapist, you begin to question the value of a god like that.
Alguns filósofos acreditavam que a redenção era a moral da história. No final da peça, a mulher que tinha sido estuprada se torna a mãe do filho de Apolo, Íon. Ele cresce para se tornar o líder da cidade-estado de Atenas. Muitas das peças refletiam o lado mais tempestuoso da natureza humana no comportamento com os deuses. Sexualidade e assuntos do coração eram controlados por Afrodite, a deusa da beleza, do amor e da fertilidade. Assim como Apolo, Afrodite teve uma vida turbulenta.
Aphrodite was connected with warfare through her union, her affair with Ares, the god of war. And they were two famous lovers. Aphrodite wasn't actually married to Ares. She was married to Hephaestus, or Vulcan, the god of the forge. But she had this flaming affair with Ares, the war god. And the question is, why are these two always getting together? It's the fury of their mutual passions which made them two gods that were beyond the control of all the other gods. And as the saying goes, that every lover is a soldier on a campaign.
Os primeiros escritos gregos transmitiam lições da vida cotidiana. Mesmo assim, algumas obras refletiam uma atitude ostensiva e sexista em relação à mulher. Um exemplo disso é a história de Hipólito.
He despised women. He despised female sexuality. He was chaste, pure. We'd send him to a psychiatrist, but pure as the snow. His stepmother's nurse, handmaid, went to Hippolytus and told Hippolytus that his stepmother was in love with him. Hippolytus was appalled. He was horrified.
When Greek men got together at the drinking parties, at the symposia, we know that they told stories, that they produced poetry, which made fun of women. In early Greek culture, women were seen as consumers of men's effort. The man had to farm, the woman simply consumed the effort, stayed at home, cooked, and was always on the man's back. And there's a strong misogynistic strain in Greek literature all the way through the 5th and the 4th century.
Então, grandes dramas e comédias eram representados em teatros gregos. Com um elenco masculino fazendo tanto papéis de deuses como de deusas, dos homens mortais e das mulheres. Mas os gregos não foram os únicos entusiasmados pelas histórias de divindades e heróis. Outros também estavam alertas. No Ocidente, além do Mediterrâneo, um grande e novo império estava nascendo. A seguir, a sombra da poderosa Roma cai sobre a Grécia Antiga. Os deuses e deusas gregos, assim como a Grécia clássica, conheceriam a devastação do tempo e da mudança. Como divindades em ação, eles iriam depois deslizar para as brumas da história. E mesmo assim, não desapareceram por completo.
Even though they're not part of our religion, we still need these stories. They're wonderful, rich, richly suggestive tales about how the world works and what we are as human beings. Generation after generation of modern students love and are fascinated by these myths. And I think that springs from something we all have in us, which is a desire to make stories, a need to understand the world by making stories about it.
A mitologia grega transcendeu os séculos, chegando até nós não só através de grandes poetas e escritores de peças, mas através de condutos de muitas outras culturas. Uma das primeiras foi Roma, no Ocidente. Ela absorveu muito do que a Grécia tinha a oferecer.
The Romans discovered Greek religion really in the 3rd century BC and began to make a bigger deal of it than it had been before. We know that there had been cultural contact for a long time, but there was a kind of prestige to the Greeks that the Romans felt they didn't have. And so they took over really the Olympian system and aligned their own local gods with more recognizable high-status Greek gods.
Ao adotar os deuses dos gregos, os romanos lotaram um panteão de divindades com características romanas longínquas. A maior prioridade era arranjar nomes romanos para eles.
Zeus became Jupiter in their terms. Ares became Mars. Athena became Minerva. When I say became, I mean that they had these gods existing already, Minerva, Mars, Jupiter, but they now aligned them in a new way that said, yes, we're part of a continuum of culture with the higher status Greeks.
Outros deuses adotados pelos romanos incluíam Hera, conhecida como Juno. Poseidon foi renomeado como Netuno. Hades reemergiu como Plutão. Afrodite seria imortalizada para sempre como a deusa Vênus. E assim, o panteão grego, em sua grande extensão, se tornou o panteão romano. Quando a poderosa Roma se desenvolveu em um império, acabou ocupando um canto pouco conhecido e empoeirado do Oriente Médio, chamado Judéia. Aqui, os hebreus se agrupavam ao redor de sua capital, Jerusalém, onde uma nova religião estava nascendo. Depois da crucificação de Cristo, seus ensinamentos se espalharam rapidamente. Até o cristianismo encontrou conexões da filosofia grega e romana, especialmente através do apóstolo Paulo.
We know that Paul was educated in Greco-Roman terms. He quotes Euripides at least several times in his epistles. Later on, notions that had developed in Platonism especially became crucial in the ways in which early Christians tried to make their religion more understandable to a highly educated class in the Greco-Roman world. In the Orthodox Church, even today, the Greek Christian Church, you still see some of the mysticism that you can identify in the works of Plato in the 4th century BC.
A crença cristã de que Jesus era o Filho de Deus, ainda que nascido de uma mulher mortal, também ressoava com os primeiros gregos.
because Greek religion was completely comfortable with the notion of gods interacting with human women, I think it helped in the spread of Christianity at an early period that a narrative like that was at its core. And so we'll never know cause and effect, and I certainly don't want to attribute early Christianity wholly to the Greeks, but it helped that the groundwork was laid.
Apesar do enorme número de divindades que reinavam sobre os gregos, há poucos séculos antes do nascimento de Cristo, uma nova ideia se espalhou entre as pessoas: a noção da existência de apenas um Deus verdadeiro.
The Greek world shifted towards monotheism, I would say, sometime around the 400s and 300s BC, with the advent of philosophy. And philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, who were skeptical of the Greek religion, the way it was written in mythology, but they did believe in some supreme force, some supreme, all-good, all-knowing kind of power.
Tal movimento em direção ao monoteísmo na Grécia Antiga não passou despercebido pelo apóstolo Paulo. Um dia, em Atenas, Paulo se dirigiu aos cidadãos gregos do topo do Aerópago, uma colina que era um lugar de reunião para um conselho de nobres.
Mas Paulo, de pé no centro do Aerópago, disse: Homens de Atenas, percebo que em todas as coisas são muito supersticiosos. Estava de passagem e, vendo seus ídolos, encontrei um altar, no qual estava escrito ao Deus desconhecido. O que estavam louvando sem saber é o que prego a vocês. Deus que criou o mundo e tudo o que há nele, e que de um homem criou a humanidade para habitar toda a face da terra. Ato, capítulo 17, versículo 22.
Uma das forças mais potentes que moldou o pensamento grego foi a consciência do pecado. Mas, há 2000 anos, o conceito de pecado era muito diferente do existente na crença dos primeiros cristãos.
The Greek word for sin, the closest one, is a word that means to miss the mark, to err, to go wrong. Now, what does that mean? To sin, if you go too high, it means that you're stepping beyond human limitations. If you go too low, it means that you're not living up to your fulfillment. And so, for the Greeks, a sin was really not fulfilling who you are.
Apesar de separados de nós por vários milênios, o grande esplendor de deuses, deusas, heróis, musas, destinos e graças, de elevadas conquistas e amargas derrotas, é tão significativo hoje quanto era para os gregos antigos.
The interesting thing about the Greeks at that period who venerated these gods, that they gave to the gods the attitude also of human beings. There was the fighting, there was the jealousy, there was the adultery, there was the happiness, there was the truth, there was the peace. There were all the things that were going on in everyday's life of the human beings was also associated with the gods. And I think that is part of the reason why these things have survived all these centuries in the minds of people and identified in the way the Greeks think even today.
Greek myths is a whole body of narratives. Say something very complicated about the world. They speak to a kind of optimism and a kind of pessimism at the same time. Greek myth as a whole really does tell us through a lot of exemplary stories, a lot of different things about the nature of reality, the nature of life, what's important, what we ought to care about.
One of the major lessons is that to read any of these stories, which are timeless treatments of big human questions of personal morality versus the morality of the state and laws that are imposed, and how do you negotiate these very difficult questions of the best behavior as a citizen in the state, those are addressed by Greek myths and by Greek legends. And you are left with this feeling that we don't know really what these gods are or who they are. But you know, we know there's some force out there. There's some huge force that's controlling our lives, and that we have to keep an open mind to what that force is doing. That's why the Greeks can speak across 3,000 years of history and tell us some questions, if not the answers, to some of the most perturbing eternal questions in the world.
Existiu outro mundo aqui outrora, e os deuses, deusas e pessoas que nele viveram ainda assombram a paisagem. Suas histórias ainda viajam através do tempo. Outro mundo aqui outrora, e os deuses, deusas e pessoas que nele viveram ainda assombram a paisagem. Suas histórias ainda viajam através do tempo. Enquanto as pessoas buscarem uma compreensão mais profunda de si mesmas e de seu mundo, a Grécia Antiga viverá.
Todos vocês, deuses deste lugar grandioso, garantam-me que serei belo no interior da minha alma. E garantam que todas as minhas posses externas estejam em harmonia pacífica com o meu interior, com o meu eu. Platão.